Hello and welcome to the next edition of the Pro AVL Podcast. Today we've taken the train up to Kingston upon Thames to chat with Richard Weir, Managing Director of Interfacio, who are a specialist recruitment company within the pro audio, video and lighting sector. Hello Richard.
Hello.
How are you?
Very good, thank you. Nice to see you here.
Yeah, nice to come up. Very nice, and you're looking very well after a little holiday en France. Why don't we start things off just with you telling us a bit about your background within the industry and your experience and how everything came about with Interfacio.
There's always been a bit of an interest in people and careers more than recruitment for me. I'm a graduate engineer, but I was always very interested in music and audio technology, and I found myself working in sales. I then spent 16 years working in sales and marketing in audio, broadcast and post-production market. Very much enjoyed that, working internationally in all parts of the world, working with teams in Japan, teams in America. All the way through that, I was conscious that there wasn't any particularly specialist service or firm looking after our industry from a recruitment point of view. But I was also very interested in what makes people decide they do in their own career. And I think that sort of ability to be able to talk about your own career, your career sort of objectives, strategy, making decisions about, do I take this job, do I not take this job? I always found that quite interesting. And I think that, combined with my experience of recruiting in the various management roles that I held previously, which culminated after 7 years working for Fostex Japan, working with the British speaker company Celestion. Started out in a marketing role and ended up managing that business for a few years. My experience of recruiting involved using all of the normal tried and tested methods that small business managers and owners do. And at some point, I would engage with one or two agencies. And I found the agency route sometimes didn't work very well at all, but a couple of times did work really well. And it was because I found an agency that I liked and I got on with and they understood us. And we consistently found ourselves hiring members of the team. And that said to me that actually, even though it costs some money, it's money well spent, because I realised how time-consuming hiring people, even in a small business, was. So that's kind of the background. The combination of the interest in career advice, career counselling, and the experience of recruiting people myself meant that when I came to finish my work at Celestion and think, what do I want to do next? I was 36. I had a fairly strong hunch that I wanted to work for myself at that point. I started working in recruitment on the 10th of September 2001, which is the day before 9/11.
So when exactly did Interfacio start?
Interfacio started in the beginning of the following year, 2002. Just me from a flat in Victoria Park in East London.
Wow.
Yeah, what happened was I think I had some air miles. I travelled to NAMM in California in January. By then I had the idea, the formulation of what Interfacio might be. I knew that we wanted to be fully global and have a very strong capability in North America, US, Europe and Asia. I didn't think that the sort of specialist recruitment service that I wanted to try and bring to the market would work on a local, national scale. It needed some sort of critical mass. And the principle, I suppose, and the philosophy was, we're going to build strategic relationships with business owners and management teams, and we're going to provide a capability to recruit people for them, for their global business teams.
Okay, so it was at NAMM that the first role came through?
So the idea was, I felt I needed to sort of test market the idea. So I went to NAMM, talked to a few people, and I expected a level of sort of pushback or skepticism. First of all, about who are you to be starting in recruitment, but also how could you possibly do that 6,000 miles away? But actually, there was a universal sort of excitement and acceptance of the fact that, wow, finally we need someone to do this. And no, we don't see it a problem at all, you being in London when, we're all over here. So it sort of got a bit of support. And what happened in practice was I bumped into a business colleague and friend that I knew who was English but lived in LA, who asked me what I was doing, and I told him about it. And he said, oh, I've just started working for, I think it was IAG, it was Wharfdale, who were then Chinese owned. And he said, I'm looking for someone to manage my sales business in Australia. And I thought, okay. And he said, do you think you could help me with that? And I thought, yes. I thought, this is a perfect example of what we want to be able to do. So I think I went back to my hotel room and cooked an ad up on Photoshop, got on the phone to the editor of NTech magazine. It ran a day or two later. We received, a number of applications from people in the industry for this national sales manager role in Australia, and got on the phone with them, had the calls, did the screening, selected a couple of candidates, put them forward, and they hired a guy. And he was there for the next, 2 or 3 years. It wasn't something I went out to try and find, but it was the epitome of what we wanted to be able to offer, was a global capability with candidates in key markets and continents, with a specialist knowledge and understanding of the industry that we already came from, and the processes that we evolved were very much from first principles.
Okay, but what did you think you could bring to the table that was different?
I didn't think our industry would sustain or support what I thought of as traditional recruitment agency methods and models. I thought there's a level of skepticism out there about recruiters and about recruitment agencies. I knew, because I had the experience myself, and I knew plenty of other people in our business, used recruiters very sparingly at that time because there weren't any specialists in our business. So I felt there needed to be an element of creating a new kind of service and a new kind of model, literally down to our fee structure and how we providing things that would be friendly and attractive to a small private business owner. Because our industry, a lot of the companies are founded by engineers or passionate audio or lighting people who start a company, and the natural instinct is, to be very cautious and pragmatic, including with costs. And the thing about recruitment is it costs money, and to make a profitable business, it's got to work. My experience was there is a false economy in trying to avoid paying recruiters to do good work, but there is still this sort of issue of you've got to engage with companies who want to work with you. They genuinely want to do it, and they've come to that conclusion themselves. There's nothing worse than trying to be asked to work on an assignment or a job when really that the company or the hiring manager or the HR teams don't actually want to work with the recruiter. They just feel they have to.
I'm intrigued to know if you think after all these years, though, now, that those conceptions, those ideas have changed at all. You still struggle with educating, or not educating, maybe not the right word, but trying to explain how it's different.
I think it's changed a little. I think it's evolved a little. I think a lot of businesses are much more strategic and invested in a plan. And there's still 2 or 3 different types of businesses. There's businesses that absolutely get the need for professional recruitment and know why it makes sense. There's businesses that will never do that, and they will always believe that they know all the people they need to know and they don't need help, and that's fine. And some of them do a very good job of hiring and recruiting their own teams. And then, of course, you've got businesses that are often bigger ones, where they've invested significantly internally within HR or talent teams and have a lot of activity that's going on internally. So they will bring us in from time to time when they know they really need help. But that actually suits us quite well. The standing joke for me was, and to some extent still is, when I started, I looked around and thought, nobody's doing this in the industry, so there's a business opportunity and I should do it. 17 years later, I know why no one else is doing it in the industry, which is quite difficult. And our industry is not a huge industry, it's quite personal. There's a lot of small to medium-sized businesses driven a lot by, passion and emotion and relationships, and not always by cold, hard business logic and rationale. And I think that makes recruiting for this industry sector, by which I mean, entertainment, media, technology, which is mostly what the sector we work in. So it needs a cultural understanding.
You talked about the importance for you of being a global business and being able to, match and work with people throughout the world, not just here in the UK. So how have you built that up in terms of those locations and people working for you?
That was actually at the beginning, partly, I suppose, an idea, and also partly a little bit by necessity. As a small business starting up myself with limited funds, I felt I couldn't do it all myself, but I also felt I couldn't necessarily just employ in a conventional sense a large team of people. And the idea that evolved for me was a little bit like sort of Recruitment 101. I made a point of not trying to model or replicate what I thought recruitment agencies do or did, and thought, how can we do this maybe slightly differently? And I was conscious that a lot of agencies, high street agencies and others, will have their sort of central office admin backup teams. And I thought, well, I need that sort of backup team, but I need them distributed around the world. So what I started to do was try to find and develop working relationships and collaborations with people that came from our industry but were in strategic locations. The first person I worked with was actually based in New York. Fantastic lady who's still very much in the industry, who I knew from a previous customer relationship. She'd worked in PR and marketing, and she came on board as a candidate development associate. So if you like, we were sort of conventional recruitment model turned upside down. We had me as the sort of consultant, biller, business person in one location, but we had our candidate interaction process in the local territories. So US was a key market, so that was our first team member, but that expanded so that we had somebody at one point in Singapore, we had somebody in Munich, we had somebody in the UK, and we had somebody in America. The client business development piece was something perhaps more close quarters and would be really more happening naturally at trade shows. We had a sort of brand marketing and promotional initiative which was focused both on potential clients, knowing about who we were and what we did, but also about the candidates. So we had to build that network in parallel. If you think about starting a recruitment business, if you have no clients and no candidates, it's not very interesting, but it's also not very interesting if you have lots of clients and no candidates, or vice versa. You need to build the two together. So that model of having these distributed candidate development associates worked really well as we grew the business. At some point, though, you start to realize that you've got quite an expensive resource and structure doing some of the what would really be traditionally back office functions, in a traditional firm. It coincided actually around with the recession time, because the recession came along, forced us to downsize and contract, and actually we went from 5 people to 1 person back to me in a year and a half. There were 3 years when nobody was employed in America through our business, whereas that typically has been 30-40% of what we do. But literally there were 3 years from 2008 to 11 when I don't think we made a single placement in the US.
At that point, did you not think, oh my God, I'm going to get out?
It's funny. I think I would have had to if we literally crashed and burned and I couldn't do it. But it was challenging, but it wasn't less interesting. It was just a bit difficult. I mean, cash flow was very, very hard, as you can imagine. And I remember, that awful small business terror mindset of just constantly focused and obsessed with making sure the cash flow is stable. But I think what happened was, it was actually partly fortuitous and partly, I think, something I'd been sort of working towards, is that we started out doing what in the recruitment business is referred to as contingency recruitment. No win, no fee, which is how most high street recruitment works. You place someone, you get paid. Looking back, I probably spent 7 or 8 years learning how to do recruitment and building a recruitment business in sort of concept. And obviously we learned lessons from some of that. But what happened around the recession time is some of our clients, one in particular, I remember, a senior member of president actually of a large company, talked with me. I was trying to pitch for some of their business. And he said, yeah, the thing about your business, Richard, is, we don't use you as much as we might because you just do contingency recruitment. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we tend to work with the bigger firms, the retained firms. And I'd already been thinking and looking at whether we could develop a more retained service. And several of my clients had said to me, actually, what you guys do is much more in line with the retained search services that we work with than it is traditional recruitment agency. And I suppose what that did was, possibly combined with being 7 years into the business, it provided me with the confidence to sort of look at our model again. And we developed a retained service at that point, which we started, I think, delivering in 2009. So we moved to a retained service offering, alongside more traditional contingency recruitment. And it got a lot of take-up, it got a lot of support. So we delivered some good senior high-end searches. And then from there, we evolved a bit more of a hybrid model, which is now probably the most popular service model that we offer. But that allowed us to get the business going back in a sort of positive direction and start to scale. But your question is about how did we go from the beginning to where we are now and grow the team and the people. Once we started to get back onto that positive track, I think that in parallel with that, we recognised that as we were growing, we needed to bring our back office candidate support a bit more in-house, a bit closer to the main office. So we restructured how we do things.
And what happened next?
Really, the next big change in the business was actually Isabel joining the company. Because when Isabel joined the company as a consultant, as a biller, we then had 2 people generating the business rather than me doing it and then a number of people working in support. We met at a trade show in America. One thing led to another. A year later we were together, and a year after that we were married, and then we had our son. And he came along, and I think he was 9 months old when Isabel decided that being a European sales director on the road a lot wasn't very compatible with family and motherhood. But the last thing Isabel and I set out to do was work together. That wasn't our plan. It just sort of evolved as we'd be stupid not to explore it a little bit. She has the key pieces that you need. She understands the industry. She's really good with people, and she's a business person because, not in a bad way, but recruitment is sales business. You have to be able to work and hustle and follow up and keep on top of things. And, when it's the right time, you have to be, looking to close business. Otherwise, nothing happens. And Isabel just naturally took to it and did incredibly well. So Isabel joining the business enabled us, as a team and me as a business owner to start to grow and scale.
So who was the next addition to the team?
So Joe joined 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago. Joe, I always felt that with what we do, R&D and engineering was a key service we should and could be able to offer. I'm a graduate engineer, but I always knew that recruiting engineers is a slightly difficult and tricky discipline. Engineers think differently, their objectives are different, their career strategies are very different. And I thought, unless I'm going to dedicate myself fully to R&D recruitment, which wasn't where I felt the core of our business sat, it's going to be hard for me to sort of make any headway there. We did a few things in R&D and they were successful, but I always thought if we could find somebody who is an R&D engineer who can recruit in our industry, that would be a real gem. But that's a hard person to find, ironically. We're recruiters, but it was a hard person to find. It took me probably 7 or 8 years from thinking about it to finding the person to do that. And Joe and I had met on an industry sailing function in 1992 when she worked for Soundcraft. She was designing audio mixers. I got back in touch with Joe, and it wasn't quite the right thing at the beginning, but literally it took three or 4 years of just chatting until the timing was right. And then Joe was like, yeah, this is good. So Joe came on board, no experience of recruitment at all, no experience of sales and business, but learnt, the hard way about recruitment. And she's done fantastically well. So we have an R&D piece, which is Joe, and Joe's doing global search and recruitment in R&D. And that's tricky because some of the values and the triggers that are interesting to engineers and R&D people, like I said, are slightly different to what might motivate a management person or a salesperson or a marketing person to move or change or develop their career. They absolutely love the technology they work with, and they can work with the same technology for 20 years and be really happy with it. They really need to be, valued in a company. But, skill sets are very, very specific. And therefore, finding the right discipline and skill for a company in R&D is really tricky. And actually, often R&D teams evolve quite organically. That they'll evolve based on who they have rather than the other way around. So when it comes to a firm saying, we think we want this, what you actually find is that's how they start out the conversation, but 6 months or 12 months later, you find actually what we really wanted was that. And so it's quite a tricky one, but that's a really useful and valuable piece of our business now, the R&D piece.
Right, but what about the expansion on a geographical level?
We've always been big in North America. We've been always done work in Asia, but Asia's been quite a challenging market, not just because it's culturally quite challenging, but because the market's always been a bit up and down. I mean, you guys will know this. I feel that in my whole career in the business, which is now 33 years, Asia's been goes through cycles. It goes through a sort of an up cycle and a down cycle. And it's 3 years, 5 years, Asia's really hot, and then it's not, then it's back on again. I think in the last 5 or 10, it's probably been consistently more up, whereas before it always seemed to be a bit hot and cold.
Okay, so this is where Bardi comes in.
Bardi is someone that I've known for as long as I've been in the industry. Bardi and I both worked he was in Canada, I was in the UK, but we both worked with Fostex. So he worked for Jam Ericsson. He actually founded the Pro Audio business for Jam. But I knew him because we'd meet at distributor conferences, and we'd always be the last two people in the bar or in the conference room arguing about some tweaky bit of product design. And we just kept in touch, and we've been good friends for a long time. And then Bardi and I were talking roughly 2 summers ago, and he was at a particular point with his own sales business and career and thinking, well, how do I evolve what I'm doing? And we both sort of stumbled across the possibility that perhaps we should be thinking about working together. We kicked it around for a few weeks and said, let's see if we can make something stick. And it took us a year to sort of find the formula and see how we could move things forward. But that's been an incredibly strong addition to the business, because we have a bit like when Isabel came to the business. He has the 3 things that you need to be able to do effective recruitment in our industry. He's really good with people. He understands the market and the culture of our industry, and he's a business person. We have a team of a total of 10, so we're still a very small business, trying to do it as well as we can, but recruitment's always changing. It's always changing from a technology point of view. It's always changing because, what's needed in the market's evolving, and the methods and processes used to recruit, of course, are different today than they were in 2002. Facebook didn't exist when I started the business, nor did LinkedIn.
So do you think it's much more challenging now, or it's just a different?
No, I think it's a different set of challenges. I think the process is the same. In the end, you're dealing with people, and it's a little bit about human nature. I think businesses are more the businesses that are in business, because we've seen a lot of businesses fail or be absorbed through acquisition. The businesses that are in business and are profitable are much more consciously managed, strategically managed. They're probably funded so that growth and business plans need to be delivered in a more critical way. Whereas I think perhaps culturally back then it was a little bit more organic. It's hard to say because it's hard to remember exactly, but I think there's more of an imperative for companies to hire good people, and I think the skills shortage, which is not just in our industry but in a lot of businesses, has meant that the emergence of more technically integrated product, the sort of business skills that are needed in 2019 versus 2002, and the fact that there's a lot of inherent growth in the sectors that we work in, whether it's in live events or in hospitality or in commercial AV. There's a huge amount of growth in all those areas. Everybody's to some extent fighting for the same talent. What we've always tried to maintain is a focus on both our clients' needs but also our candidates', if you like, journeys, because that sort of career support is central to why we do what we do. It may sound a bit glib, but actually what we all really enjoy and what we're good at, and what's really important as part of what we offer as a service, is that we can talk to our candidates, help them identify the right strategic career decision. And there's an interesting thing there, which is human nature, and I've been there exactly myself, so I can totally relate to this. When somebody finds themselves in a situation where they either have to or decide they want to change jobs, human nature is that you want to do something that you're going to enjoy, that you can do, and that you're going to find interesting. So you can be quite short-term about the decisions you make. The counter to that is, from a longer-term career point of view, you need to be quite long-term about those decisions that you make, because once you start a job, you could be there for 2 or 3 years before you blink, and suddenly your life's moved on. And if you make that decision without thinking the long-term implications, or without recognising your own real capabilities or interests or ambitions, you can set down the wrong path. And you do see people who repeatedly go through that same cycle. If you do something for the wrong reasons, it doesn't quite stick. You change, you do something else, still doesn't quite stick. So one of the things that we have always felt is the thing that we try to do and offer that's a real value. It goes back to the very beginning of our conversation today. It's the career counselling piece. It's going to the maths teacher at school and saying, what should I do? And I've had conversations with people where I absolutely know they haven't been able to have that conversation with anyone else, because they can't talk to their wife or their girlfriend or their husband or their mum about it, because they just won't understand. Or worse, they won't want to, because they're not prepared to come out from the sort of the ego and the idea of who they are publicly with their family or their friends, but they need to talk privately about their own concerns or anxieties or ambitions. And that's what I think one of the things that we provide that's really valuable.
Talking about working with the candidates, though, once they've been placed, what's the general sort of pattern that happens after that? I mean, often it can be a month to 2 months before, from agreeing the job to them actually walking through the front door of the new office, can't it?
Yes. So there's two pieces to that. That one that you're talking about there, the interim between the deal and the recruitment process and the starting the role, the pre-boarding, as it has been coined, is really interesting, and I think has become more critical as part of the process in recent years, as it's more competitive to find the same talent, and many people in our industry are gainfully employed and not necessarily out of work. The lead times and the cycles can be several months from even finalising a deal to someone starting. We've seen a few times the dynamic shift very dramatically, because people just forget that once they were focused on securing a new hire for their business, and that person was also engaged in finding themselves a new job, and then suddenly we're all back to normal for a few weeks or a few months. It's really key both parties continue to be engaged actively and intelligently in the dynamic and the relationship, so that when they do eventually start, they're still on the same page as opposed to moving on. What happens psychologically is when somebody starts to decide that they're going to move on, they may not have been thinking about it for years, and there may be one particular thing that catches their attention and they say, you know what, I'm going to go after that job, or it's time for me to move on from my company. Having said that, once they've done that, once they've made that mental switch, suddenly all sorts of other things start bubbling up, and there'll be industry contacts or friends who will say, I didn't know you were thinking of moving, you should talk to us, and all these things suddenly shift, and what was a very clear focused conversation during a recruitment process might suddenly sort of shift and die down. So it's really important that the engagement piece is retained through that process. And I just think it's about being thoughtful. I think companies typically are trained or coached to do the onboarding bit. When someone starts, you have an induction plan. It might be 10 days, it might be 2 months, it might be 6 months, but that's quite a well-known, thought-through concept in management and business. The bit beforehand is often not thought about very much. And I think if you allow a disconnect between the process of hiring someone and the process of them starting, things can get a little bit off track.
So it's important to not forget that interim.
Yeah, I think it's particularly important. I've had conversations with company managers and I've said, this is great, it's all done, deal's done, but please don't forget, to keep thinking, keep talking to each other, because businesses move very quickly. I mean, they say a week's a long time in politics. It's the same in a business, and a week can be a long time. Suddenly priorities have shifted, or business plans have slightly refocused, and if you're not all on the same page, you can get slightly out of step.
What advice, if any, would you give to somebody looking to work in our wonderful industry that we're involved in?
Well, yes, okay. When I normally have this conversation, it's with relatively young people who are either still students or just graduating. It's funny because one doesn't see the number of people now wanting to work in our business that one did probably several years ago. I think there are other sectors that have become hot and sexy in a way that music technology or audio might have been 20 years ago. I think a lot of people who want to come to our industry, they look at the production side of the business. They want to work in events. They want to mix shows, or they want to do lighting design, and that's obviously a very important track, and that's something that many people will go through. People coming straight into the manufacturing business or the product business is less common to see. Don't expect this industry to be particularly traditional or structured when it comes to people giving you the tools to be successful. You've got to contribute. You've got to understand the business.
Would you say that you still feel it's fun, or is it moved to being too corporate and sort of spreadsheety? Because that's one of the things that, we talk about passion, don't we? People staying in this industry for the passion, and you're never going to be a millionaire, are you?
No, I think there's still a huge amount of passion and fun in the business, at a product level, at a service level, and at an end customer level. And I think the inherent reason why most people come and work in our business is still that they want to be involved with or working around production, AV, entertainment, content. And it's a strange mix of technology and art sort of all together. And I think that sort of epitomises a lot of the companies we work with, this sort of balance of science and art. And I still think it's there, but also, and this again isn't unique to our industry, I think it's probably true across the world and the tech sector and enterprise in general. The way different businesses are funded clearly affects dramatically how the culture of that business will work. And we see this night and day comparisons from one company to the next in terms of business culture. And in fact, when we look at a recruitment assignment, that's probably the biggest single thing we focus on. It's the culture of that business, and will somebody work in that business? Somebody could have done a fantastic job in company A, but be a complete misfit in company B. But yeah, I think it's still driven by entertainment and live production in the same way. Probably, when I started in the business, it was all about music recording. It was all music and studio production, post production. Now there's a lot more live. There's a lot more, location stuff happening. But then the other piece that's grown hugely is the commercial, the corporate AV piece. That's massive. There's nothing going on at the level it is now in that area. And that's where a lot of the investment and money is. And a lot of the brands have refocused their own work towards that sector too. It's incredibly rewarding working with people helping them find their next right opportunity and career move. And you asked about the journey with the candidates. The second piece of the journey with the candidates, of course, is what happens after they start and get placed. Actually, things for us go quite quiet then, because it's sort of, again, slightly human nature that everyone just sort of backs off and doesn't keep in touch, because we don't so much need to. But we have candidates that we've had relationships with for 15 plus years. There's 2 or 3 people I think we've placed 2 or 3 times. It's not something we go out and look to do, but it just naturally comes around. They'll get back in touch when they're ready to make a change, or some other circumstances develop. But no, it's absolutely exciting and stimulating and challenging. And the process, the fundamental process hasn't changed. We're dealing with people. We're trying to match up skills needs with company needs. We're very involved with the businesses and the clients we work with at a sort of strategic level. I think they value the fact that they can talk to us, sometimes not about a particular recruitment or hire, but just about this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and therefore when something does come around, we kind of understand what's behind it, which is really important, because that helps you actually identify the right people or person. And sometimes they may not have done themselves. They may think we want this. We'll talk to them and say, actually, based on what you've told us strategically and business plan and the problems you're going to find hiring that person, perhaps what you really want is that over there, and we'll evolve those things together. That's something I think they value, that they get from us.
Only because you mentioned it earlier about obviously clients not always wanting to be seen with you. Has anyone ever actually physically run away from you?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, there are 1 or 2 people who will see me all literally cross the aisle and turn around and go the other way. I don't know why. I think people have a perception of what we do being slightly different from what it is. We've always, like I said, had a very public, overt presence in the business, for example, at trade shows. I think some people think, we go to trade shows and just go around trying to steal people. And it's just a complete anathema for us, because that's not how it works. We're there to learn about the business, about what those companies are doing and network a bit. But yeah, I think people do sometimes have preconceptions about recruiters, like they have about estate agents and
the press,
solicitors and the press. Yeah.
Just one final question: what next for Interfacio?
Well, the serious answer to that is, we've always grown organically, but there are certain pieces of the business that we are keen and looking to evolve at the right time when we're ready to do it. Probably what's next is 1 or 2 more desks within the business that we service in a more specific, dedicated way. We surprisingly still do relatively little business in the UK. I mean, we probably do 15% of our business in the UK, but it's not a huge amount given we're a UK firm. And I think I've always felt that we could and should do more in the UK market. And that's just about finding the right personality and individuals to do it, having the time to manage it properly. We do like to do what we do properly, so sometimes we'll be quite conscious of not trying to do things if we're not really fully in it. But no, the UK business naturally is picking up for us, and we're doing more and more. But I think because our team's grown, we're now 10, I think we've got more bandwidth and more capability to service local work a bit better. Lighting's a sector which has just started to take off for us in the last year or 2. Again, that's always been a market which feels like it could and should be an opportunity, but we haven't necessarily gone after it proactively. But I think we've started to do more and more, and that's given us more knowledge. It's given us, the market's more aware of who we are. So that's definitely happening for us. The other piece is probably around non-permanent executive search and recruitment. What we do at the moment is all permanent, with very, very little exception. Occasionally we might work on an interim or a contract placement, but I think for me that there's a big opportunity to develop a more bespoke contract interim service within our business, which I think could be in a number of different market verticals. We looked at it a few years ago around the visual effects area in film and TV production, and we've looked at it also around AV project consulting. But I think that'll be a piece that probably evolves in the next couple of years.
Good stuff. Well, thank you very much for taking the time. Very much enjoyed that. And thank you for croissants and coffee too. Lovely.
Good.